Hi class, today I'm going to show you an example of your area model division. This is part of your homework, and this is the sheet that I attached to your homework to help you so that you have more space. If you notice, I've already written out the steps. These steps are just written as the symbol, just like we learned in class for long division. All I've done is kind of change this bring down to bring over, because as you remember when we were doing area model, we're going to bring those answers over into the next square. Remember too that the difference with area model is that this check isn't going to be used until the very end, whereas in long division we check every time. So a little bit different on the steps, but that way we just have one set of steps to remember. Remember also that when we first start, we have to label some things. So I'm going to go ahead and make up a problem. Let's say that we're going to divide 9,063 divided by 6. So when I know that that's my problem, the first thing I need to do is go ahead and label all my things. So if you notice down here at the bottom of these squares, there's some little squares for you to label what place you're in. So we're going to go ahead and label our places. So I'm going to put a little TH for thousands, an H for hundreds, a T for tens, and an O for ones. And similarly, I'm going to kind of label the top with the thing I'm going to start with, which is 1,000, 100, 10, and 1. Okay, I also need to make sure that I write in the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and put the problem here. So that's 9,063, which goes in our first box, and then we're dividing it by 6. Next is that because we're dividing by 6, we're going to go ahead and fill in these little multiple boxes. So that way we have all our multiples down here, and it makes it easier for us to kind of remember what our magic numbers are going to be up at the top. So our multiples of 6, we're just going to fill them in. So 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, etc. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue filling these in until I get to 9. Okay, and once I've done that, I can go ahead and start. So we're going to kind of follow these steps on this side. Like I said, these are the same steps we've been learning for long division, except for a few exceptions. We're going to start with divide, which we sometimes call finding the magic number. So when we're finding the magic number, we're trying to see what can we multiply over here times our divisor that gets us as close as we can get to our dividend without going over. So when we start with 1,000, we can see that 1 times 6 down here gives us 6, and we drop those zeros, that would be 6,000. If I do 2 times 6,000, or 2,000 times 6, that gives me 12,000, and then I've gone way over my 9,000. So I already know that 2,000 is not going to work. So I can write 2,000 here, but I know I'm not going to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and circle that 1,000, and I'm going to check off my division step because I've just done that. Next in our steps is multiply. So we're going to go ahead and multiply what we circled by the thing we divided by. So we just kind of did that in our heads, but now we're going to write it underneath the number. So we know 1,000 times 6, like we just said, is 6,000. And our next step over here tells us that we're going to subtract. So I'm going to go ahead and check off my multiplication step so I can keep track of what I'm doing. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract. And it looks like I'm left with 3,063. As I mentioned earlier, we're not going to check until we get all the way to the end. So I'm just going to check off that little check mark. And then my next step says that I'm going to bring over. So basically the little arrow means I'm going to take this number, I'm going to bring it over to the hundredths place. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that over. I'm going to rewrite that number. And then I'm going to start with the 100, and I'm going to think about what can get me closest to 3,063. So we've talked about in class that a little tip for you is that you can underline those first two numbers, and that gives you kind of a clue of where can you look in your multiples. So you notice down here in my multiples, I'm trying to get to something that's close to 30. And if I do times 5, that is 30. If I do times 6, that gives me 36, and that's already going to be over because then I would have 3,600. So I'm going to go ahead and do 5, but I have to remember I'm in my hundreds place. So really that's going to be 500. So I'm going to write 500 right here. Remember, we know 100 is too small, so we're going to go ahead and circle the 500. I forgot to check off my bring over and repeat over here, so I checked those off. And I've just found my magic number again, which is the division part. Again, I can look at my steps and I can see that what's next is to multiply. So I'm going to multiply my 500 times my 6. And like we just discussed, that's going to give us 30, but really we're dropping those other 2 zeros. So what I have is 3,000 because there's 2 zeros in my products, in my factors, sorry. So there needs to be 2 zeros in my product. My next step over here tells me that I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to go ahead and check off what I've done already, which is multiply, and I'm going to go ahead and check off subtract since I'm about to do that. Now I'm going to subtract and I'm left with 63. Remember, we're not checking just yet. It's telling us to bring it over. So we're going to bring this over into the tens place. My next step tells me to repeat or remainder, but remainder only happens at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and check off my repeat. And I'm going to go back up to the top, which is divide, which, like we've spoken about before, is kind of like finding the magic number. So you're seeing what can you multiply by 6 that gets you close to 63 without going over. So remember, we're in our tens place. That's why that 10 is there as our placeholder. And we're going to go ahead and try 10 because it seems like it's going to be close to what we need. So 10 times 6 is 60. And I know if I try 20, then that's going to give me 120. And then I'm over, so I can't use that. So I'm going to go ahead and circle the 10 so that I know what I'm going to multiply by. So here I'm going to check off my division symbol because I just divided or found the magic number. And now I'm going to multiply, which is next. So we're doing 10 times 6, which is 60. Remember, I'm going to write the 60 underneath. My next step tells me to subtract. So I'm going to go ahead and check off my subtraction symbol and subtract those numbers. And I'm left with 3. Remember, we don't check until the very end, so I'm just putting a check mark by my check. And my next symbol tells me I'm going to bring this number over. So I'm bringing it over into the ones place. Okay, and then I have checked off that arrow, and then my next step is to repeat. So I'm going to check off my R for repeat. And I'm going to go all the way back up to the top. So you notice we're just doing the same steps over and over again. So now I'm dividing again, finding the magic number. If you notice over here, my 1 is already too big because 1 times 6 is going to be 6. And I'm trying to get to 3 without going over. So really, if 1 doesn't work, the only other option I have is to use 0. So I'm going to cross off this 1. I'm going to put a 0, check off my division symbol, go to the next symbol, which is to multiply. Okay, so when I'm multiplying, I'm doing 0 times 6, and that's going to give me 0. So I'm going to go ahead and check off my multiplication symbol. I'm going to write the 0 under the 3. My next step tells me to subtract. And 3 minus 0 is 3. Now at this point, when we get to the check here, what we're checking is to make sure that our remainder is smaller than what we're dividing by. So similar to what we've been learning in long division, we always have to make sure that whatever we have here is smaller than what we're dividing by. Because if this were a number like 7, then that means we could have made another group of 6. Okay, so here we've got a 3. We were checking to make sure it's smaller than the 6, and it is. So we're good there. So I'll go ahead and put my check mark. And then here's where, instead of repeating, I don't have anything left to repeat. I don't have anything to bring over. This is going to be my remainder. So instead of, I just checked, instead of bringing over, I'm going to be using this as my remainder. So I'm going to make sure to take this 3 and put it up in my answer. So that I don't forget about it. And then really my answer is in expanded form up at the top. So we've got 1,000, 500, 10, and 0 with a remainder of 3, which means that when I write my answer out, it's going to be 1,510 with a remainder of 3. Okay, when we check it with multiplication, we're always going to take our answer. So I'm going to take what I found right here. I'm going to go ahead and put it down here where it says check with multiplication. I'm going to say 1,510, and I'm going to multiply that by what I originally divided by. So, oops, I need to change back to my pencil. I'm going to multiply that by 6. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so when I do 6 times 0, that gave me 0. Then 6 times 1 was 6. 6 times 5 is 30, so I dropped the 0, put the 3 up. And then 6 times 1 plus 3 was 9. So it looks like so far I have 9,060. And then I'm going to take that remainder of 3 and add it back in. And I want to make sure that my answer is what I started with. So when I started, I had 9,063. That's what I have now when I'm checking with the opposite operation. So this means that my original answer is correct. So now I'm going to go ahead and write my answer here in the answer blank. So I'm going to put 1,510 with a remainder of 3. So I hope this helps to remind you of our steps for area model. I know we've started doing long division, so this might be a little rusty. So I wanted to make sure and send a video so it'll kind of help you out this week with your homework in the evenings. Thanks, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a good night.